I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is one of the most horrific cases of child abuse we've ever seen right here on Court TV. The result was fatal, but the manner was just plain evil. Here's the story. It was one of the most disturbing cases in recent Court TV history. A mother accused of the unthinkable. Shanda Vander Ark, once a respected Michigan mom, was convicted in December of 2023 of first-degree murder and child abuse, the chilling result of torturing her 15-year-old son, Timothy Ferguson, to death. Timothy, found emaciated at just 69 pounds in July of 2022, endured ice baths, shackling, pepper sauce forced into his mouth, and starvation behind locked pantry doors. During her trial, she vomited in court when shown distressing images of her son. A jury deliberated only an hour before returning guilty verdicts on murder and open child abuse. The judge harshly labeled her conduct torture, sentencing her to life without parole plus 50 to 100 years. Now, behind bars, Vander Ark is fighting for a new trial. You know, a lot of times when you take a walk down memory lane, it's like, oh, pleasant memories. This is not one of those memories. This was a tough one. This was a tough case for everyone involved, from the jury to the lawyers involved in the case to the judge and even the viewers. For folks who watched this trial, this was difficult. This was tough. Now, you just saw the opening piece where we talked about the victim. He was a teenager at the time, 15 years old, like 69 pounds. I have no images to show you of him. No images. This is rough stuff, this case. So now, the reason we're talking about it, one of the reasons is because Shanda Vander Ark is saying, listen, I deserve a new trial. Let me put up on the screen what she is saying here, through her attorneys, obviously, her appellate attorneys. Defendant appellant Shanda Margaret Vander Ark, through attorney Ronald D. Ambrose, submits this motion for a new trial or evidentiary hearing. Ms. Vander Ark was not competent to continue with the trial as evidenced by reported statements of her incompetency and that she was in a catatonic state. It makes no difference that she may have signed a document for the continuation of the trial if she was not competent. Ms. Vander Ark was denied the effective assistance of counsel. So this is a real issue. This is a real issue. This isn't make-believe. You know, the state of mind, the competency of a defendant during the course of the entire proceedings is very, very crucial. We've seen cases where it haven't gone forward because the defendant is not competent to stand trial. So you can't have a trial with a defendant that's not competent. But there is a big question here about what was going on during this trial, and that brings us to the first question in our investigation. Was Shanda Vander Ark in a catatonic state? Was she? And if so, what exactly does that mean? Joining us, forensic psychologist Dr. Dana Anderson. She's also the host of Killer Psychologist podcast. And joining us on the phone, Matt Roberts, chief trial attorney for the Muskegon County Prosecutor's Office in Michigan. He was the prosecutor for Shanda Vander Ark's murder trial. Thank you both for being here. What I wanted to do, Matt, start with you. What did you notice or see or understand about the state of mind of Shanda Vander Ark during the course of this trial where you successfully prosecuted her?
Well, good evening, Vinnie. It's good to be here. I can tell you throughout the trial, throughout the portion where Ms. Vander Ark was present, she was very alert. She was very attentive. She was constantly writing notes back and forth with her attorney, seemed able to communicate There were really no issues raised. It wasn't until we got to the actual cross-examination, and then, as you pointed out, we had the vomiting, fake vomiting maybe incident, that things started to shift a little bit, and it wasn't until after cross-examination that she decided she was not going to return to the courtroom, and now that we get this motion here claiming to be in a catatonic state. So it certainly didn't jive with my observations of her in the courtroom at the time, or frankly, even her attorney didn't indicate he had any problems communicating during that time period leading up to the cross-examination.
Let's take a look at part of that cross-examination when she loses it on the stand. Let's take a look.
You testified that you gave Timothy a warm bath the night before he passed away, that last night, July 5th. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
This is hours before he dies, right?
Yes, sir.
You look like that when you put him in the bathtub?
Vander Ark, do we have a trash can?
I did. I placed a trash.
You did? Yeah, I see. All right.
Would you like the beard removed? Please, for just a moment. I'll keep it.
All right. Please rise.
All right, Dr. Dana Anderson, she has shown a picture of her son just prior to him passing away or the completion of the murder by Shanda Vander Ark. And at that moment, she appears to attempt to, or perhaps throw up. I don't know. I called it a crocodile puke myself during the trial. But what are your thoughts about, could something like that put someone into an altered state of mind, like shock them into a catatonic state?
Well, I worked in a psychiatric facility and I've worked in the emergency room, and I've seen people in catatonic states where they're in a stupor, they're immobile, they're not able to respond to their environment or initiate movement or speak. So I'm not seeing any clinical indicators here that support that she was in a catatonic state during her trial or related up to her legal proceedings. So by contrast, she was articulate, logical, goal-directed in her speech, and she demonstrated a coherent thought process. There wasn't any signs of psychosis. And in fact, she was quite articulate and reminding us that she graduated from law school and was the top of her class. So what I'm seeing is an intelligent woman who's manipulative.
Oh, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Doc. Let's take a listen. This is the moment from the trial when all of a sudden Shanda Vander Ark disappears. We're going to take a look and a listen to that, and then you'll hear what her attorney said about it afterwards.
People of the state of Michigan versus Shanda Vander Ark. This is day 4 of a jury trial. The record should reflect that Mr. Johnson is present in the courtroom representing Ms. Vander Ark. Mr. Roberts is here on behalf of the people of the state of Michigan. Ms. Vander Ark is not present. My understanding, Mr. Johnson, is that she is suffering some medical distress this morning, and I know you want to put something on the record regarding that before we go forward, so you may proceed.
I do, Your Honor. My client is suffering a medical issue. She, at this point, is not able to participate in trial, given this medical situation. She's chosen to waive her right to be here. She's requesting not to come back again. For this purpose, she is not requesting an iPad or any other aid to allow her to watch the proceedings from where she is. She is content to rest at this point and simply allow her legal team to go forward representing her in this matter.
I came in to see my client, and she was in a catatonic state. She's having some emotional and mental difficulties with this entire process, with the entire thing for 18 months. That's who she is. That's who she's been consistent. She was not able to be brought up today, and we sat and we talked and we discussed that it would be better if she just remained where she were and to remain not sedated, but in a situation where she wasn't required to receive much input, and I would run back and forth with her and let her know what's going on. But that was a decision by myself and my client after, and she made the decision based on my recommendations and my explanation to her of her options.
Okay, Dr. Dana Anderson, I just want some clarification here. If someone's in a catatonic state, can they communicate? Can you have a conversation with someone in a catatonic state?
Well, hers is very selective. So suddenly she just doesn't want to come to court anymore for her murder trial. She was clearly coherent and capable of communicating, and there wasn't any signs of that. It's, you know, I see this in so many types of cases. People are desperate to control the narrative on how they want to be seen. And so she needs to come up with some mitigating factors. That she has some mental issues, and people can feign, exaggerate, malinger, or manipulate symptoms. But truly, catatonia isn't what we're seeing here.
Let me ask you, Matt Roberts, did you get to see her after that moment? And if you didn't, is there video of her, perhaps from, you know, if she's in the jail or somewhere else that someone could look at if there is ever any sort of an evidentiary hearing in all of this?
Well, we've looked into that possibility. Certainly, I did not have an opportunity to see her. I know there may be some brief body cam video of her being told about the verdict because she stays out of the courtroom until the verdict. I didn't see her personally again until the sentencing in the case. There may be some body cam video, but in general, the jail bodyguards don't, or jail guards don't body record everything that's taking place in the jail, so it's unlikely. So we really have to rely on Mr. Johnson's recollection there. And Mr. Johnson was in a difficult position with his client, and maybe catatonic wasn't the right turn of phrase to use, and the appellate attorney has certainly seized upon that now, but she was able to communicate, and I would agree with Dr. Anderson that it was very selective when these moments came up, and much like the cross-examination, she would always selectively not remember the bad things that had happened, but she could remember the other stuff. She could remember graduating first in her class. She could remember training service animals, all those types of things. So that became a consistent theme throughout the cross-examination, and then played itself out afterwards as she decided not to come back to court.
Absolutely. Okay, I guess you're going to stick around. Coming up next, how did Shanda end up with custody of Timothy?
When did Timothy come to your care?
May of 2021.
Matriarch of the Adelson family gets arrested.
Donna Adelson is facing charges of murder, the death of her former son-in-law, Dan Markell.
Prosecutors say a bitter child custody battle was the motive for the murder-for-hire plot.
Now that Donna has turned into a defendant, what's next for the Adelson clan?
Now that the ship is really sinking fast, blood doesn't matter that much.
The Matriarch Mastermind Murder Trial. Live coverage begins this August on Court TV.
I'm choosing not to remember your son dead, looking like a Holocaust victim, but I'm choosing to remember like that. And you can't even look at him. That's how he was. A beautiful child with a lot of life in his eyes. That's who your son was. And you took that from him.
What a moment. What a moment. You know, for a judge, a lot of times judges are very, you know, cold, detached. But in a moment of sentencing, when you have a victim like that, it's nice to see a judge lay out some of the reality for everyone involved, especially the defendant. And I'm glad that the judge did that in this case. So I want you to take a listen to some of the testimony from Shanda Vander Ark from her trial, because this, like, how does this happen? Well, first she has to have him, right? She has to be taking care of him. Here she is explaining the status, her legal status as it relates to her son, Timothy.
Without legal custody, how do you get Timothy into school?
You can't.
And without legal custody, How do you get medical treatment for Timothy?
You can't.
Did your husband at least send his, I assume he had medical insurance for Timothy, did he send that?
He did not send me. I requested his medical card, his insurance card, and he never sent it to me.
So there you hear her admitting, I don't have legal custody of this child, because that was taken away from her. But he was there in her house. That brings us to the next question in our investigation. How did Shanda end up with custody of Timothy? How does that happen? Still with us to help try to answer this question, or joining us, author and nationally certified mental health counselor, Sharonda Brown, and still with us on the phone, Matt Roberts. He was the prosecutor in the case. I want you to take a listen, both of you, to a little more of the testimony from the trial from Shanda Vander Ark, from her perspective, explaining how she ended up having custody of Timothy, even though she didn't have legal custody.
When did Timothy come to your care?
May of 2021.
Prior to that, who had physical and legal custody of Timothy?
My ex-husband.
Okay. And when he sent, and how did it happen that you ended up with custody then?
My ex reached out to me stating that Timothy he could no longer handle him, that he was pushing his buttons, and that he needed to send him to live with me.
Okay. And you agreed to that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Sharonda, I want to begin with you just on that note, where you have one of these households where the parents aren't together, extremely common. But in this case, not so common. I mean, mom actually lost custody. And then she's alleging that the ex said, I can't handle it anymore. Then this poor child was doomed. You have one parent apparently doesn't want to take care of him, and the other one wants to do harm to him.
When people are in a crisis state, they will tend to do things such as, send children where they don't need to be for their own survival. And it sounds like Dad had reached a breaking point, and he was thinking the only person that he could call on, even in this state, was the child's mother. I think sometimes people also believe that as time goes by, that people change. And when he becomes disconnected from his own role, then he begins to project what could be, which I call sometimes the grief phase, where people fantasize, romanticize the loss of certain things, to think, okay, well, maybe she's better now, and she says she can do it, so she can. And so that plays a huge part in grief at times. So he was not only stressed, but also grieving the idea of not being able to co-parent with the mother in the way that he would like to. And so when people are fantasizing those possibilities, they will possibly put other people at risk for the sake of having a life that they lost or maybe wanted. So that's how that happens.
Yeah, Matt, how does this, it seems like she did something previously that prevented her from having any rights to legal custody of the child. There were issues previously, and somehow she ends up back with him. Is this something, who do we blame here? Do we blame the parents? Do we blame the state for not overseeing it? Who's at fault here, Matt? How did this happen?
Well, what we do know is that in 2012, there were allegations brought against Shanda in the state of Oklahoma, and at that time, the state was prepared to terminate her parental rights, although they ultimately withdrew that request when she agreed to a custody change. That's quite a common practice. It happens all the time because, again, the preference that the DHS and protective services have to work is to keep the child with a relative if possible and to avoid termination. So that agreement was made. So a lot of people have wanted to point the finger and say that Oklahoma dropped the ball there. I can't necessarily find fault with that. They were operating under the conditions they thought. And I think Sharonda really hit it there, that the problem with Eric, with his father, is that he never would have envisioned that this is what was going to happen, and that yes, he did want something better for Timothy and wanted to believe that Shanda could change, and that's ultimately, I hope, why the decision was made to return to him. It's easy to want to pass out blame in a situation like this, but again, I think everybody was doing the best that they thought was the right thing to do, except for Shanda, quite frankly, and it's just through the hindsight of how badly this went, I just don't think we could say that was the right call to make at the time.
I can't imagine anyone could ever, Sharonda, perceive or predict that a parent would do what she did to their own child. I think that's the part that we have to acknowledge. Like, this level of torture is evil. It is beyond anything we've seen here in these cases on court. There's abuse, but usually there's some level of rage. This was just slow torture. There's no way that you could expect that someone would act that way or treat a child that way.
Yeah, in a perfect world, that would definitely be the assumption that who could do this? Who could do this? Well, when you have people who have a perfectionist component to their personality, it's actually quite common. And the torture usually is a symbolism of what they're ashamed of. So it's a slow, and it's a slow process. It's a slow crisis. So when you look at your children, most of the time parents say, my child is a reflection of me. So when you have a child that has a disability or may seem difficult, and you have a parent who may be a helicopter parent or maybe extremely perfectionist, they're going to see that child and see themselves as flawed. So ultimately, the abuse towards the child is more of like an internal thing to themselves. But because of that perfectionist, they're not going to take it out on themselves. They'll do it to the child in hopes that it's helpful to their ego in some form of fashion. So it's a total detachment from reality, but it definitely happens.
We've got more to get to. Our guests are staying with us. Up next, why did Shanda Vander Ark do it? I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of one of the most horrific cases of child abuse we've ever seen on court TV. As we watched the trial, it was difficult to understand how anyone could torture a child this way. And in this case, it was the child's own mother. Here's the story. Shanda Vander Ark, once a respected law clerk and mother, faced a harrowing courtroom battle that unveiled unspeakable cruelty. In December of 2023, after only an hour of jury deliberations, she was convicted of first-degree murder and first-degree child abuse for torturing her 15-year-old son, Timothy Ferguson, to death by starvation, ice baths, shackling, and pepper sauce abuse. During testimony, Vander Ark vomited under cross-examination. Her other son, Paul, admitted carrying out orders and described Timothy as skin and bones trapped in a closet behind a blue tarp. On January 23rd, 2024, the judge sentenced her to life without parole plus 50 to 100 years for child abuse, noting the severity of torture warranted a departure from sentencing guidelines. Now claiming she was catatonic and incompetent during her trial, Vander Ark is seeking a new trial. The community remains stunned as her fate and justice for Timothy hangs in the balance. And much like the judge wants to remember Timothy, those are the images that we're showing you. Young Timothy, not the images of Timothy, 15 years old, 69 pounds that the jury saw. We're not putting those up on the screen for you. Horrific. So what exactly happened here? What happened to Timothy? I want you to take a listen to this testimony from Detective Joel Hokasima, who saw videos, who saw the final moments of this child's life, which were recorded unbelievably. Take a listen, because I think it gives you a good idea of painting the picture of what actually happened to this child.
During this time, and previously while I observed Timothy in the room, he was taking short, shallow breaths through his mouth. Kind of picture how a fish out of water would breathe, with gasping for breath through their mouth. And she clamps his mouth shut, tells him that he doesn't need to breathe like that, and then holds his mouth shut for a period of time until he's forced to take breaths through his nose, and tells him, see, you didn't need to breathe through your mouth like that. You're being a dummy or an idiot, something along those lines. He can be seen, his chest rising, lowering very slightly, small little movements, and then there is a point in time where you stop seeing that, and his body just kind of relaxes, and it appears to me that he has died at that point.
It was difficult for him to testify. I told you this was a tough case for everyone involved. And again, you think about who the defendant was. Timothy's mom, which brings us to the next question in our investigation. Why did Shanda Vander Ark do it? Seemingly inexplicable. We're going to try to answer it. Joining me, forensic psychologist Dr. Dana Anderson, and with us on the phone, Matt Roberts. He was the prosecutor in this murder trial. Let's take a listen before we start answering the questions so we have a better idea of exactly what was done and what this child went through. Here is some of the significant testimony and arguments made during the course of the trial.
But as a punishment for your child, you decided that hot sauce, audio alarms, cold, we'll get into this later, but cold, at least cold, if not ice baths, and isolation and sensory deprivation were appropriate means of punishment. Is that your testimony? Those
Yes,
were
sir.
appropriate forms of punishment?
For some of it, yes, sir.
June 13th at 2:49 p.m. Timothy tried to sneak food. I yelled at him, and then he became momentarily unresponsive, and then I saw this, and that text has a photo attached.
And then what's the text associated with the photo, the next text?
The next text, he's bone thin, Mama. I honestly think we need to actually feed him. Very, very thin bones protruding. In particular, he wasn't wearing any pants, so I could see his hip bones and his knee joint very prominently displayed as she positioned him in front of the camera.
And did it appear that he was wearing a diaper?
He was wearing an adult diaper. I could hear Miss Vander Ark tell Timothy that he is pathetic, and then adds that, but I already knew that as she was dragging him in.
The day before he dies. Forgot to tell you this before I left. Timothy was doing his fake stumbling and falling last night, of course, so I decided to prove once again how fake it is. I asked him if he would stop doing that, if he would eat a whole pizza by himself, and he said yes, of course. And then I told him how obvious it was that he was being fake, and he had just proven that yet again, and of course he just looked down and didn't respond.
There were leg shackles in the first common room where Timothy's bed was. There was a drawer. The desk area was really cluttered, and there was like a little stack of drawers, and it was open, and in the drawer was a set of leg shackles.
What did you understand from that text message from your mother about where Timothy had been up until the time you were at work at 11:30 at night?
Still in the tub.
So that's 9 hours plus from the time that you first put him in the tub at 2 o'clock?
Yes.
The camera in his room needs to be picked up, please. Lots of hot sauce for that. What do I do if he doesn't finish within the assigned time? Hot sauce. Do you recall while Timothy was in the tub, an exchange where your mother inquired about pouring hot sauce on his private parts?
I do, yes.
Did you do that?
No. That was beyond as everything else was.
I want to begin with Matt Roberts, who's with us by phone. Matt, you prosecuted the case. You know all the facts of this case. You've spoken to all the witnesses. You had an opportunity to question the defendant herself. By the end of this trial, did you have any better understanding as to why she did this?
Not really, Vinny. Honestly, the only thing that I could even reconcile, and it was really kind of my final question to her in the cross-examination, is that Timothy just stopped being a person to her. Timothy had just become a project, a task that she had to overcome. She kept referring to it in cross-examination. He wasn't going to win. he was being deceitful, he was being this, he was being that. She just really had stopped thinking about him as a person, and that's the only thing I could come up with, and it still doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand how her mother could do that, but she had somehow been able to compartmentalize that child away from her other two children and sort of held Timothy out as this example of, this is what happens when a child is bad. We heard that with the forensic interview of the younger child, that Timothy's was used as this example of, if you're bad, these are the things that are going to happen to you. So it was just a project to her. It was just like another, for lack of a better way of putting it, another one of the service dogs that she was training, and she couldn't train it out of him.
Dr. Dana Anderson, how difficult is it to answer this question, why, and where does this level of behavior and cruelty come from?
Well, I agree with what Matt said. So over time, people like this with some of these, I'm going to say, narcissistic traits can start to devalue other people and treat them as property, and just have no empathy or remorse. For narcissistic abuse, it isn't just punishment. It's a way to diminish and devalue others to maintain their own grandiose, inflated sense of superiority. So sometimes I see parents, and I do evaluations in cases like this, where the parent will just perceive themselves as superior, and it's all about power and control. And if the parent feels threatened, like the child may report or tell someone, they can further punish and abuse them to keep them living in fear, so they won't report or tell anyone. So they just treat them as property and devalue them. There's a total profound lack of empathy.
Let's take a listen to two of Timothy's older siblings.
Timothy was so smart. He could take anything apart with any tools, or none at all. He had trouble focusing, but when he did, he was just as smart as the rest of his class. He made people angry, yes, but then he would look at you with those big baby blue eyes, and you could never stay mad at him.
Timothy wasn't surrounded by people who loved him when he died. And if I had known that, nothing could have stopped me from rescuing him and holding him in my arms and telling him I love him, that his big brothers got him, just like I did the day he was born. But because of Shanda Vander Ark's actions, I instead got to cradle the bag of his ashes in my arms. In all my life, I only knew one thing that my little brother didn't like. He hated goodbyes. If he had to say goodbye to anyone, he would cry, and he would hold you, and he would say, "Don't go." But now I'm the one crying, but I never got to say goodbye. So now I turn to the justice system in hopes that in addition to serving the maximum penalty, that there will be no appeals or second chances.
Dr. Dana Anderson, this is, for the siblings, it's difficult as well. Obviously, one of them was a defendant in all of this. We'll talk about him coming up. But for those two, really a difficult spot, but they seem to have some understanding that, this was an evil woman.
Yeah, I can't imagine what they're going through. It's so heartbreaking, and a mother of his teenage son. I think these siblings, they're devastated. I find it just shocking, the abuse that occurred, and my heart goes out to the family members. I'm thankful to hear from them and to hear their empathy and their love for their brother.
Absolutely. Dr. Dana Anderson, the Killer Psychologist podcast, we appreciate your valuable time tonight. Matt's going to stick around. Still to come, what happened to Paul Ferguson?
Do you love Timothy?
Can I say that I loved him during the time before his death?
Yes. Did you love him before his death?
Brian Kohberger accepted a plea offer.
A shocking turn of events.
How do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Convicted killer Brian Kohberger will learn his fate for murdering 4 Idaho college students.
He is the boogeyman.
And come face to face with the families of his victims.
I pray that we have justice.
The sentencing of Brian Kohberger. Live coverage begins July 23rd, only on Court TV.
You don't have to like Paul Ferguson. I don't like Paul Ferguson. I hold Paul Ferguson responsible for the death of Timothy Ferguson just as I do the defendant in this case. But as we talked about in jury selection, it's not for you to decide what happens with Paul Ferguson. He's already made his choice, and he's agreed to cooperate and testify against his mother. And he will be pleading to a first-degree child abuse charge here.
The testimony of Paul Ferguson was crucial in this case, in the prosecution of Shanda Vander Ark. The testimony of her son. It was difficult at times to watch his testimony and trying to understand him as well. Take a listen to this part where he's talking about his brother Timothy, the brother that he tortured.
Do you love Timothy?
I suppose I didn't love him enough.
No,
that's why I'm trying to bring justice for him.
Just a moment.
But can I say that I loved him during the time before his death?
Yes. Did you love him before his death?
With all the ways I acted, I cannot.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
Let me ask you this. When did you start feeling this way? While he was alive or after you found out that the way he was being treated killed him?
After.
And that brings us to the next question in our investigation, and it's about Timothy's brother. What happened to Paul Ferguson? Joining me, author, nationally certified mental health counselor Shanda Brown, and still with us, Matt Roberts. He was the prosecutor in the case, and we've got him on video. Fantastic. Shanda, when you look at Paul Ferguson and you look at who he ended up being and what he did to his brother, how did he get there? How did he get to that dark, dark place?
Well, abusers don't just start at the last child. They start with the first child, and it's very possible that he was abused. Children like to please their parents, and that people-pleasing is not about seeing their parents happy as it is controlling the opinions that their parents have of them. And at some point, when you become abused as well, you will create this bond with your abuser to stay alive. And that's what they call trauma bonding or Stockholm syndrome. It's where you bond with your abuser for the sake of your own survival, and you start to please them and do the things they ask of you. Whether it's damaging or not to the relationship, you're going to do it because you want to survive and you want to please them. And I think that's what happened with him. When you look at him, you can tell that he too's not happy. He may have possibly experienced some trauma with her as well, and for his own survival, clung to that and became a victim as well as an abuser just to make sure that he was okay.
Let's take a listen to the judge at the sentencing for Paul Ferguson, because the judge in this case really did what I wished all judges would do in all cases, which is really, especially at the time of sentencing, really explain what is going on and try to have it as a real moment in what happened in this case, which is the death of a little boy who was tortured. Let's take a listen.
In my opinion, Mr. Ferguson's involvement in repeated acts of abuse that amounted to physical and psychological torture over a period of months reflects a general lack of empathy for his brother and a lack of remorse for his actions. I don't think you wanted Tim to die either, like your mother, because you would get caught and you wouldn't torture him anymore. And believe me, I have tried to sit here and try to think, well, maybe Mr. Ferguson's not as bad as Mom. I think you're just as bad, if not worse.
Powerful statement. Matt, what was your assessment of Paul Ferguson? And obviously, he was crucial in the prosecution of Shanda, but clearly had a lot of culpability, and you were not giving him a free ride at all.
Yeah, so from the beginning, we were much of the opinion that Shanda just indicated there, that our belief was that Paul was probably manipulated and was doing these things to please Shanda. And certainly that really continues to be my belief here. The difficulty for Paul and what really led the judge to impose the sentence that he did here is that ultimately the psychological evaluations that were conducted of Paul after Shanda's case was over and prior to his sentencing really didn't support that. They leaned more into this idea that Paul was a willing participant in this, and that notion that he was somehow trauma bonding with his abuser, that didn't really come through. And that was kind of a shock. I was honestly surprised by that, because I really did think that that's what was going on here. But it didn't play itself out in the psychological profile, and ultimately the judge imposed a very lengthy sentence for him as a result.
Shanda, does someone like Paul Ferguson, could he ever be, and I don't want to use the word normal, but be healed in a sense, get any sort of perspective on understanding what he did and understanding who his mother is, and come to terms with that in any meaningful way?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Abusers become abusers because they were abused. And I'm in the field of treating abusers and people who were abused. So I definitely have to believe that they will recover. And with the proper treatment and the proper understanding, they will. But they have to change their environments. Like with any addiction, being abusive is an addiction. Being controlling is an addiction. So you have to treat it like an addiction. And once you're out of the environment and you're getting the help, you can definitely recover. Now, will he always have a tendency to abuse? Absolutely. Because it's going to be his go-to when he's in survival. But if he has the proper care, proper treatment, and the proper support systems, he definitely can beat this situation that he's in.
Matt, I had one final question for you. And in the beginning of the show, I was explaining and reminding folks how difficult this case was for everyone involved. From your perspective, for you, you did an incredible job in the courtroom, but you're a human being also. Right? I know but you're a human being. How did you make it through it? How are you doing these days? And what is the long-term image that's going to be in your mind when you think back to this case?
Well, and I appreciate that, Vinny. And the thing that we all have to recognize, and that we have a big problem with, quite frankly, just in this country, is recognizing when you need to reach out for help. And I did go through a period of time where I needed to talk to somebody about this. I have a good friend at work who put me in touch with somebody that I was able to speak through to kind of process things. It was after the preliminary examination prior to the trial, and that really helped me kind of compartmentalize a little bit better and be able to focus. But there's certainly nothing to be ashamed of in reaching out for help when it's needed. The lasting image to me for this still continues to be the thing that haunts me about this case, and probably will for as long as I do this job, is that this was a 15-year-old boy who had to have understood, despite whatever difficulties he may have had, to really have understood what was happening to himself, to feel himself slipping away, and that the only people who could help him out of that situation were the very people that were inflicting it upon him. And that's just absolutely gut-wrenching.
Absolutely. Well, Matt, thank you so much for joining us. And Shanda Brown, always great to have your insight and expertise as well. Motions for new trials and appeals for new trials happen all the time. That's because convicted killers like Shanda Vander Ark have nothing but time. The evidence in this case was overwhelming, but we have rules and standards in our justice system. So even the likes of Vander Ark can raise questions about their convictions. But that doesn't mean that they'll win. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.